Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Jarrett Main, and today I'm going to talk about, briefly, I don't think this will be a super long one, but a book I just finished that I finished it last night. Over the moon, super excited about this thing, about this book. And this is, sorry, I've got like crazy sunlight streaming in, which I don't know if that's good or bad for how we're doing this, but this is Speedboat by Renata Adler, published by NYRB Classics. And I mean, I've known about this book or heard about this book forever. I mean, for a long time, 20 years maybe or something. I've been in my consciousness like tons of books, of course, but I never knew what the deal was with it. I just kind of knew it was like maybe in one of these like sort of important experimental novels, and that's honestly all I knew. So I picked it up. The NYRB recently had a sale, and there was some manchette that I wanted. So that I now have like all the manchette they've published. I grabbed JR because I think I'm going to read that with Dan from the Weird Book Club this year. And, I had finished just finished the recognitions. And I kind of knew that I wanted one of those copies because I won't feel as like weird or bad about like it being heavily read as opposed to like the Donkey Archive editions, which are now I guess like collector's items or something. Anyway, I'm talking way too much about stuff that does not matter. Welcome back, definitely my channel. So anyway, so I picked it up because it's a title I know not much about, and frankly, I kind of came into I have like a stack of books that are sort of like up next, and like many of you, I tend to acquire more books than faster than I can read them. But I was looking for something kind of slim. I don't know why. I just kind of picked it up, and I was immediately enthralled. So this does, and I think I've talked about this before. I definitely talked about this with Evan Dara's Lost Scrapbook. But I always use, when it comes to experimental fiction, I always use as my high watermark Wittgenstein's Mistress by David Markson. And the reason that I use that one in particular is that it does this thing, and I know I've said this before, but it does this thing where the form and the structure that makes it novel and experimental ends up being an important aspect of the text in terms of it feels like, like once you hit the end, like, it couldn't have been told differently. Like this, like increased my joy of the text because what the work was ultimately about and what it was ultimately doing, and like it needed this experimental form or structure. Okay. And I talked about that with Lost Scrapbook. I thought that was the same way. I compared it to a radio dial, and that was sort of the vibe that it gave you, and then that turned out in the end to ultimately be kind of necessary to the story. Well, same deal here, Speedboat. So for Speedboat, we have, I don't think you get her name till like midway through, but our narrator is Jen Fain, who is a journalist, early 30s, late 20s, it feels like, from the sort of the tone, and it's like kind of like anecdote after anecdote after anecdote, and maybe like the first third or something, you're enjoying it, you're laughing because this is an extremely funny book. I mean, that's the one thing that like you have to take away from this review, hopefully, is this is hilarious. And so, you're laughing, you're enjoying it, but you're not quite putting the pieces together yet on, okay, what are we doing here in terms of an overall work? But then you start to see that there's these threads and they're kind of swimming throughout, like, and this one's kind of connecting with this one and that one with this one, and the structure of it is kind of working because we are in someone's conscious. We're not in their subconscious, but we're in somebody's thoughts. They're clearly mediated, edited thoughts, but they're thoughts. And so it bouncing around makes a lot of thematic sense. And it really works, right? So like the structure really works. Now, I am going to not belabor the point any further because as I start to kind of like talk my way through it, I'm realizing that what would be best is for me, you see, I got some flags on here. Let me dive you in. Like, I think, you know what I'm going to do for this? You could read this book in any order, I think, and the Afterwards by Guy Tribet sort of suggests the same. But just because you could read it in any order doesn't mean that you should read it in any order, okay? Think of Hopscotch, for instance, a book that you could read in any order. Yeah, you could, but there have been choices that are made, subtle choices, and those choices are not always clear on a first read or even necessarily have to be clear to a reader. So anyway, I'm going to give you a brief experience by clocking through different places of what it might be like to read this book. But again, not in order, and you're not going to get those threads kind of woven together. Basically, you're going to get like the things that I flagged where I was like, this was a favorite part, this made me laugh, or this was really interesting. But instead of commentary and all that stuff, I'm just going to read it through. As I stop, you'll see, because I moved to the next one and read it through, and then I'll end the video just like that, and that'll be it. Like, hopefully I will let the words of Speedboat do the heavy lifting, and then I don't have to think of any. Wow, isn't that I mean, I couldn't think of words this good anyway, right? Like, and then to describe it, to give it any sort of critical analysis is beyond my capability, I think. And I'll just kind of like sum up that before I get into my little project by saying this is really a satire of New York, of academics, of coastal elites as we now know it and term it. Of course, this novel's from the 70s, but it's fresh as a daisy, as they say. I mean, it's right still on the pulse. You know, it makes you feel that not much has changed. Some, I mean, then there's definitely some, you know, backwards attitudes that towards well, I don't want to give that part away. Okay. There's definitely some out-of-date cultural references. We'll put it that way. But it is like lambasting, you know, New York academics, the liberal coastal elites, that sort of whole thing, but also has this bohemian kind of spirit too, where it makes you want to be a part of the group that's being satirized. All right, let's go into it. She's into it much better than me. I was lying on a Mediterranean boat deck on a windless day. It was odd that I should be there, but no more odd than my work, or the slums, or the places where people do find themselves as their luck shifts. A girl of 18 was taking the sun with great seriousness. The rest of our party was swimming or playing cards below or drinking hard. The girl was blonde, shy, and laconic. After 2 hours of silence in that sun, she spoke. "When you have a tan," she said, "what have you got?" For 6 months, they had listened in sympathy and indignation to the tears, the threats, the partings, and reconciliations. They were so unequivocally for the girl that only the purest professionalism kept them at times from breaking in. This is phone operators as they're listening into a couple break up and make up. Guess I do need a little bit. On the day Tim, after calls to his best friend, his first wife, and his therapist, gave in at last, the oldest operator, who had been on the switchboard for 20 years, actually wept. The other two told the receptionist at lunch. All 4 ladies had a drink, and then bought a card of slightly obscene felicitations. They had wavered toward the sentimental, but rejected it as basically unswinging. They did not sign the card. Tim and his girl, who had been breaking up once again on the day they received it, she was packing, they were in his apartment, were appalled. As a result of the card and discussions of what to do about it, what it implied, who knew and who didn't, they married. Sometimes I think they are writers who do not write. That writers write is meant to be self-evident. People like to say it. I find it is hardly ever true. Writers drink, writers rant, writers phone, writers sleep. I have met very few writers who write at all. Me either. Self-included. In a year when it was rumored that Life was going to do an article on American expatriates in Paris, perhaps there is that rumor every year or two. In any case, the Americans stopped washing their hair, wrote poetry, and were seen much in cafes, complaining of publicity. At the party, though, they stayed so long I left and took a room in a hotel. In his small, airless apartment, the sports writer served local wine, cheap scotch and beer. His wife and the other sports writers' wives, 4 of them pregnant, 2 not apparently so, sat in the bedroom drinking the Almaden with ice. They discussed rents. The sports writers, hitting the scotch and the beer, sat in the living room talking of books they planned to write but never would. The pressures were wrong. There was just not enough money and not enough time. No one was rich. No one was poor. No one was ever going to do anything of consequence. All right, we got 2 more here. Oh, and on the same page. Oh, they're kind of connected. That's right. These are the threads I'm talking about. There's a professor in this one section. It's not so bad, the professor said. It only isn't wonderful. Nobody has an obligation to be wonderful. And then some more sections, and all acts are acts of aggression. We know that, the professor said. The point is to give them other properties. So I thought I'd end on that because this book has other properties. It is funny. It is a satire. But it has other properties. And in those other properties is where the real joy is found. And to me, it's the narrator, that character, the work that is being done with that voice. I think it's really magical and I love it. So, yeah. There's some things I had to say about Speedboat by Renata Adler. And yeah, I hope you guys are doing well. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you've read this, or I guess she has another one that I need to now get, Pitch Dark. And that one's from 1983. This is from 1976. So I need to get Pitch Dark next time NYRB has a sale. And yeah. All right. Later. Be good to folks.